give me an overview of where your family is originally from?
Sure. So I'm half Armenian, so it's my father's side that's Armenian, and he and his sister and his parents were all born in Fresno County. So it was my great-grandparents that came to the United States as young people. They all came and got married here, so they were young enough that they weren't married when they arrived, and they came with their parents. So there's a number of generations that have been here in Fresno County since the 1900s, plus or minus. They came at various times. So on my grandfather's side, the Paloutzian family and the Tatoyan family came from Parchange, which is in Harput, in Western Armenia or modern day Turkey. And this is the book that's about that village.
Wow.
And it was written originally in the 30s in Armenian, and then in the 80s it was translated to English, and it has just all kinds of cultural things about the village. It has genealogies, and there's pictures. They gathered people together in the different towns of the diaspora and took pictures. So there's some pictures of my family members in here when they gathered in the 30s for those. So that's where they were from. The Paloutzians and the Tatoyans were from Parchange. And actually the name Paloutzian is interesting because it says in here that during the second period of migration, whatever that was, that would be something to research to figure out. The Paloutzians came from the village of Palu to Parchange, and so thus they were known as Paloutzians, the people from Palu. So, and then on my grandmother's side, her name is Dorothy Basmajian, and the Basmajians, her father's family came from Diyarbakir, or Dikranagard is what Armenians call it, and also in Western Armenia. And then her mother's family came from Bitlis. And so I don't know a whole lot about their histories before they came. There's probably some research to do. That's probably written in Armenian, so need some help with translations, or as things get translated or as records become more available, there might be more things to find about the villages from which they came.
Do you have any stories that you've heard from about what your great-grandparents' lives were like in those towns?
I don't, because I never met any of my great-grandparents on that side, and I don't think even my dad growing up, his great-grandparents, his grandmothers spoke limited English, and then, they just didn't talk about those things. They would just, kind of pat you on the head, my little grandchild. And they didn't have that those kinds of discussions. And I don't even know how much my great-grandparents talked to my grandparents about what their experiences were like. They were just really keen to assimilate and become Americans and learn English. And so my dad, like anyone growing up, would catch a smattering of Armenian words, but he never learned Armenian. His parents didn't speak Armenian to him. They only spoke Armenian to their parents.
Yeah. Do you know if your great-grandparents immigrated during the genocide?
It was before the genocide.
Before the genocide.
Yeah.
Do you know what year you said?
I do. So I think I have. This is about the Paloutzian family. So my great-grandfather, Tadeusz Paloutzian, arrived in 1901 with his father, Manuk Paloutzian, and Manuk's second wife, Miriam, and their infant daughter, Pearl. So Tadeusz's birth mother, we don't know her name, or we're assuming she died, but we don't know when or any of the circumstances, and I haven't even been able to discover her name.
Wow.
So, but yeah, they came in 1901 through the East Coast, through Ellis Island, They arrived in 1897, his sisters, and then what did I say? He and his parents arrived in 1899, and so the families lived in New Jersey for a little while and worked there before they came to Fresno County. But they were in Fresno County, but right around the 1900s.
Wow.
Yeah, and then so that's my great grandfather, my grandmother's father's side. On her mother's side, her maiden name, or my grandmother's. Now I'm getting confused. So my grandmother, Dorothy Basmajian, her mother's maiden name was Bedigian, and Marion Bedigian arrived with her mother and her brother in 1906. And I don't think they stayed on the East Coast too long, but they came to California.
Okay.
And her father was already deceased, so they came without him. Her mother was already a widow.
Do you know why these great-grandparents left Armenia at the time?
I don't really know, but we can assume that because of the Hamidian massacres and just the difficult life circumstances that they experienced, and probably mostly for economic opportunities. A lot of the Paloutzian families came and then went back and forth a few times. You know, they came and worked in places on the East Coast, like in New Jersey and Massachusetts, and before they all ended up out in California. But I think there is, you know, some level of just searching for a better life. It's, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but
Yeah.
I think times were tough, and there was opportunities in America. And I think at the time the Protestant missionaries did a lot of encouraging people, or made it possible for people to travel from Western Armenia to the United States.
Do you know if they had any difficulties with immigration?
I don't know. Obviously, all four of my great-grandparents were able to come. There are other family members that that I know came, but then I can't trace them, so I think maybe they went back and then weren't able to come back for various reasons. But so many of them were here, I think that probably helped a lot. I know, so my grandmother, Dorothy, her mother, Mary. Her mother is Margaret. Margaret's brother was a man named Krikor Karabian, and he came very early and over time brought a lot of his family. So he was very instrumental in bringing his family to Fresno. So I think a lot of that's how many different members of the family came, is that they helped each other after they had settled.
And so family was one factor bringing part of your ancestors to Fresno. Do you know on your grandfather's side why they were moving to California?
I think for the same reasons. I think, so my great-grandfather, Tadavos, his father was Manug, and so they came, and Tadavos was a young man, and Manug brought his second wife and his infant daughter. And then Manug had three brothers, and they also had came to California or to the United States at various times. The earliest one arrived in 1888. That's Hovannes Paloutzian. And he actually returned to Turkey, married a woman, had a daughter, came back to the United States in 1901, left in 1903. His wife must have passed away because he remarried with a Greek wife. and then they settled in California. And then there was another brother, Bedros Paloutzian, who changed his name to Peter Thompson. They had Cachador was another brother who arrived in 1906. And then there's Hovannes, Bedros, Manug, and Cachador were the four brothers. Then they had a cousin, Harry, and a cousin, Tumas, who also came, and then another relative who was either maybe a half-sister or a cousin It's been sort of hard to narrow down. And her name was Agda Barton. And that they were from Parchange also. That they were all from Parchange. They arrived in 1899. So most of them were here before 1900, with a few arriving in 1906 and 1913. So it was all before the genocide. So I have a big family picture of so this is all the Paloutzians in about 1918.
That's great. Such a big thing.
Yeah. And if you want to look at them later.
That's great. Thank you. You mentioned learning English and the ideas of assimilation when your family initially got here. I was wondering if you heard about any other stories of difficulties with integration, getting jobs, school, those kinds of things.
Just heard. I mean, so like Bedros Paloutzian changed his name to Peter Thompson. So I think, and then a few members of Hovhannes Paloutzian's family changed their names too to different, more Americanized last names or different spellings. So I think those are ways of trying to fit in better. I know that a lot of them were farming, and none of my family, although there are a lot of successful Armenian farming families, my family wasn't one of them. They didn't seem to be able to hold on to property. They lost their farms during the Depression.
Oh, wow.
So, they weren't successful, like, financially. Obviously, their families survived and have grown and persisted, but they certainly had a hard life. They weren't wealthy by any means. I know that they didn't live in town, as most Armenians weren't allowed to buy property in town. In fact, this house that I purchased, I have the original covenant that says no Armenians.
Wow.
And so, now I own it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I think, and there, you hear about discriminations with people not wanting to hire Armenians, or, there's various reasons why there were different organizations that formed because they weren't allowed to join the established organizations. So I didn't ever hear any really specific stories, but that was generally sort of the kinds of things that happened.
Can you tell me more about what you know about what your grandparents' lives were like growing up in Fresno?
Sure. So, I mean, actually, I don't know a lot of details. I mean, my grandmother, Dorothy, she was born in Watoki, which is like a small community kind of near Reedley. And her father, they had a farm, I believe. I don't know if I've ever located where that farm was. And at some point they moved into town, but I'm not sure that her father ever did anything as a career beyond farming. I think he sold at the there was a downtown, a free market, a farmer's market that was in downtown Fresno along M Street near the courthouse, that he sold fruits and vegetables. She went to school. I think she went to Four Seas Business College, but I don't think she ever had too much success with finding work. I don't know. I know they from pictures that we have, they would go picnics on the Kings River and go to the mountains. There's pictures of them in the snow and as young people. I don't know that they were super active in their churches. My grandmother's family attended Holy Trinity, like that's where their baptisms and marriages and funerals were. But I haven't found a lot of information about them being participating in a big way, like their names aren't on things. And then my grandfather's family, the Paloutzians, went to First Armenian Presbyterian. And again, they didn't, I don't know that they were really very active. My father was baptized there, and his parents would like drop the kids off for Sunday school, but didn't attend themselves. Although I believe that, they had a strong faith and were Christians, being involved in a church didn't seem to be a large part of their life. They did a lot of things with their families. They had get-togethers and picnics and barbecues and played cards and that kind of thing.
Wow. And so were both of your parents as well born in Fresno?
Yeah, so my dad was born in Fresno. My mom was actually, so my mom's not Armenian, but she was born in Las Vegas and then came to Fresno, I believe, before she was a year old. Her father was in the army.
Okay.
And so, but her mother's family was settled in Fresno. So, but both my parents grew up in Fresno.
And can you tell me more about your dad's upbringing then as well, and what you gather is his sense of Armenian identity?
So they lived on Harrison Avenue, which is actually, Harrison is right here. And so if you go a mile south of where my house is now, that's where their house was on Harrison. And actually I lived there. So there's like going in so many directions. But so my dad and his sister and their parents, they grew up there, and I think had what sounds like a really good childhood, lots of time with their cousins. They have good stories about, the neighborhood, and riding his bike to the Roding Park and riding his bike down the Belmont underpass. And he played sports, played baseball, and I think it was generally a very good, fairly happy time. I know that his parents were very, they were warriors, right? They weren't people that like to take risks. And I think that that's sort of a generational thing because of, the trauma of immigration and knowing what was happening in the world, even though they weren't there to experience the genocide. I'm sure they read things in the paper or maybe heard from other people. The Basmagians did have, so it's going back, but one of my great grandfather's nephews, his family, I believe they were in Syria, and they have a story, a genocide story of, being marched in the desert, and they ended up coming to Canada in the 50s. And I only recently really found out, we had a letter that was in Armenian that I had translated that was from the nephew to my great grandfather. And through DNA actually made a connection to a family that's here in Fresno. So it's like one of their descendants ended up in Fresno, and I'm very curious to know, like, did they ever connect? How much aware they were of each other? And there's a lot of missing information. But we were talking about my dad. But anyway, I think he had a pretty, good upbringing. He went to Fresno High, right over there. So.
And you mentioned that his family wasn't perhaps as involved in the Armenian churches, but are you aware of any other Armenian institutions or activities he was a part of?
I don't know that they really, like I said, my dad and his sister went to Sunday school at First Armenian Presbyterian, and they were both baptized there. but I don't think they had a lot of involvement with the church, as far as maybe attending on occasion and, weddings and funerals and baptisms and that kind of thing. I don't think they joined, like, the organizations. There were organizations of, like, the different villages from Western Armenia. So there was, like, a Parchange group. There was, a Beatlisi group. The different villages would have their own organizations, and they would do, I think picnics was a big thing.
Yeah.
With gatherings and stuff like that. I mean, there's things like the Triple X fraternity, but my family wasn't really involved in that. Like, one of my dad's cousins got involved in that later. So I think mostly they just sort of kept their culture just like within their family, mostly. There wasn't a lot of that I'm aware of, a lot of like civic activities.
Can you tell me more about what keeping culture in the family looked like for them?
I think a lot of it is around food, which you'll probably hear a lot of. But I think that's, those things get passed down, from parents to children, probably more so mothers and daughters, passing down recipes. But me and one of my sisters, and one of my brothers too, we still cook things that were our grandmother's and our great aunt's recipes. Wow. And that makes our Thanksgiving different. Like, Armenian Thanksgiving looks a little different because there's no potatoes, there's pilaf, right? Or there's things like that. It's like it's turkey with subaragi and pilaf, and so it might look a little different.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it's just getting together with family, but it's been more recently that I've always wanted to have a closer connection, because we didn't. So my mom, not Armenian, she was Roman Catholic. So when my parents got married, they raised us kids in the Catholic Church. So I didn't have a connection to an Armenian church, and so I always felt being half Armenian and not. Like, I didn't know that there were things that Armenians participated in. Really, like, I would hear about things. I think it was in high school. Another Armenian friend said something about the Armenian Olympics, and I was like, "What is that? I've never heard of that." But it's like a youth Olympics. That's something you can look up. I don't know a whole lot about it, but there was these activities and things. There's camps, right? Kids from churches go to Armenian camps, and I never had any of that experience. So I always felt a little bit less than, like, am I really Armenian? Like, I am Armenian, but yeah. And so as I grew up, got older, and had my own autonomy to get involved in activities, I've always kind of sought out to engage in my culture more. And then I've been doing genealogy since I was 13.
Wow.
That's when my grandfather passed away. So my grandfather passed away in 1985, and I was 13 years old in the 8th grade. And his wife, my grandmother, was already living in a rest home. So because grandma was in a rest home, they had to clean out the house. So, like, all these pictures are like in a box in the garage, or I think in the garage, just in the cardboard box in the garage. And like, we didn't know who a lot of these people were. So I spent a lot of my youth like trying to figure out who these people were. And just as the internet became more of a thing, I was always just Googling and searching. And as more and more records became available, I tried to find out more information, and started writing a blog, and then getting into having people contact me for information, or they saw something on my blog, and so ended up meeting quite a few different cousins, there's all these relations out there. I feel like I'm related to half of Fresno County.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
very cool. I do want to talk about all of your getting into genealogy in a bit, but I
Yeah.
also want to cover your own childhood as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you born, and do you have any siblings?
So I was born in Fresno, right here, at Fresno Community. I'm the oldest of 6 children.
Wow.
And we lived here in the house that my grandparents had on Harrison. When my dad came back from Vietnam, at some point they had bought another house and then maybe rented out the original house. And then my dad bought it. And so then that's where I lived the first 3 years of my life. And my brother Robert was born and lived in Fresno for a few months before we moved to Kingsburg, which is about 25 miles south of here.
Okay.
And so we all grew up in Kingsburg and went to Kingsburg schools.
Were you around a lot of Armenian children growing up?
Mostly just my cousins. I mean, the thing about being Armenian is that if your father's half is the Armenian side and you have the last name that ends in IAN, or if you're from a prominent Armenian family, then everybody knows you're Armenian, or at least people who know Armenians know that you're Armenian. And other Armenians recognize that you're Armenian. It was kind of funny that there were kids in my class growing up where their mom was Armenian and their dad wasn't, and I didn't know that they were Armenian.
Oh, wow.
But there were kids that were Armenian, and in fact I have a funny picture from like my 6th birthday or 8th birthday or something like that, and like I subtitled it the neighborhood Armenians and the Paulsons, because it was like there were like 4 Armenian families, and probably just because like my parents or my dad like knew their families, or they were in the neighborhood, so I did I was around a number of Armenians, but mostly it was the family, my cousins.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about getting to spend time with your family growing up?
It was mostly on holidays. I remember, so my dad's sister just lived down the street from us, so we would spend, the pattern got to be Thanksgiving at Auntie Arlene's, and Christmas was at our house. And Easter, a lot of times we went out to, my dad was very close to his cousins on the Basmagian side, and we would go out to his cousin Joanne's a lot for Easter. And so it was a lot of, holiday times. It's a lot of food.
Yeah.
I remember 4th of July parties, and there would be other Armenian families, because that's who, like, my aunt and uncles, they had other Armenian friends. Yeah.
Did you get to see your grandparents on your dad's side a lot?
Yeah. Unfortunately, like I said, my grandpa passed away when I was 13, and my grandmother had Alzheimer's. And so she had started to exhibit the signs, like when I was 10 or 11. And so we did see them all the time, but, I was young. And so it's not like we had conversations about anything. It was just that, you hug your grandparents and, but we did see them, pretty frequently, several times a month, I'm sure. Because, there's always a different holiday or someone's birthday or, and they were always there for all the events. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And so after you were 13 is when you started getting into genealogy.
That was definitely, I was always interested in the family history, and I always like looking at pictures and listening to the adults talk and stuff, but it was when we got this box of pictures, and it's like, who are these people? And, just trying to figure it out just based on the way they looked, and like, who, this must be their parents or whatever, and then, and just doing more research, and like, it was like a puzzle, and so it's become like my favorite hobby. To me, it's just like solving puzzles, and I just love it, and I'm happy to like do it for other people just because I like doing it so much.
Wow, that's so great.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about a difficult time you had figuring out some part of your family tree?
Oh gosh. Well, like every piece of information you kind of have to dig for, and sometimes you're searching through images of of documents where you're, it's like kind of tedious, I don't know, it's like things sort of just fall into place, and sometimes it takes a long time before you find a piece of information. I learned a lot of tricks. Finding Armenian names in the census, there's different tricks that you can use, like using wildcards and just putting IAN, or just using, because depending on which census year, they might say that they were from Turkey, or they might say that they're from Armenia, or later on they might say that they're from Russia. And so like knowing how people described where they were from, so yeah, I don't know if I can think of any like particular, I mean, I've had, like, I would go visit cemeteries a lot, and I remember one time finding out that I was at the wrong cemetery because it was called like West Selma Cemetery or Selma West Cemetery, like that's what it said on the death certificate, but that's not what it said on the maps anymore. And but finally going, oh, there's another cemetery over here, maybe that's the one, and then finding what I was looking for.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what getting to know about your ancestors has meant to you?
It's meant a lot, because I like that I can share it with other people who are interested. I've met a lot of cousins and made a lot of friends doing genealogy, and just knowing more about my own culture and my family's story. I don't know, it just feels good. Yeah.
I would also like to talk about your adult life and young adult life. Can you tell me a bit about what high school and college was like for you?
For the most part, life was good, right? I was always very shy though, and so in some ways I think, high school, gosh, that was hard. Like, I would never think that high school was like the best time of my life. Definitely college was more the best time of my life. But even as I get older, like I am, you grow into yourself and you learn more things about yourself. So, but high school, I mean, I excelled academically, but I wasn't like really strongly driven to achieve. Like I would do, it was easy for me to get by without doing a lot of work. And so I would do, I was kind of like, I'll do what I have to do to get a B. I just would get an A by not trying very hard. So, and my parents kind of knew that, so they would get mad at me when I got B's because they knew I wasn't trying. But I mean, it was basically a good experience, good friends, and, living in a small town in Kingsburg, it was kind of challenging for me because, I didn't feel like I fit in a lot there. And so like when I was able to go away to college, I really like discovered my people more and found, the activities and, more different experiences than what. And then the other thing too is that like when you live in a small town and like everybody knows your history, because in Kingsburg, like you go to grade school with, and then you're going to high school with these kids, 12 years later, and they know they remember when you threw up in the first grade, or they like everything is, you've spent all that time together. And so when you get to go away to college, which I was determined I was not staying near Kingsburg or Fresno to go to college, and so I went up to Humboldt State for 2 years, which is about as far away as you could go in California, stay in California. Just to like, you were a different person. No one knew your history or had any preconceptions about you, and so whatever you were interested in, you could pursue, and people took you for face value. Yeah.
I was wondering if your interest in genealogy ever translated into other activities or connections during those years, or if it was something more private to you.
I think it wasn't until I was in college a little bit more, because so the internet became a thing when I was in college, and I remember when reading an article about what Google, you're like, you can type someone's name in there and find information about them, or so those very early days, as you know, that was how like I played around. I would just type in Paloutzian or type in, you know, Armenians in Fresno, and of course at that time there wasn't a whole lot, but since I was sort of like on the beginning of internet research, I was always doing it, and so I just jumped on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing that came, as far as, you know, there used to be message boards for genealogy, and you know, that's turned into like Facebook or you know, or websites, and so it wasn't until I transferred to Cal Poly after 2 years at Humboldt, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And while I was there, a friend, she started an Armenian students organization. I don't know if there might have been one in the past, but there wasn't one at the time that I was there. And she got my name from one of my dad's cousins who taught at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, and they had been in an event together, and so she contacted me, and I became a part of this new Armenian Students Association. And so that was really interesting because her family came to the United States much later. So after like the time of the genocide, I think her family went to Lebanon, and you know, and then came to the United States much more recently. So they still spoke Armenian, and they had like a totally different, and she was very politically active. And so like, I don't think I'd ever really, like, I knew there was a genocide, but I didn't realize that it was when in college when I realized, oh, there's a genocide remembrance day. There's like people who are actively seeking political statements from politicians about, you know, about genocide denial, or, you know, recognizing the genocide, and so that's when I started to learn more about those things. Yeah. And then like I got to learn Armenian dancing from them, and so that was a really cool touch point, you know. I sort of like in my mind like, oh, she's like a modern Armenian, like where like my family came over, and so my family's Armenian culture is the culture of the turn of the century, right? Because that's what they brought over, and so it became the Fresno Armenian culture of these people that came in the 1900s. Whereas her Armenian culture was like, they're still speaking Armenian, and they're, you know, engaged in Armenianness, you know, going to Armenian church. So it was a very different experience, and I appreciated it a lot.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Did you feel like a lot of the members of that Armenian Students Association were kind of on the spectrum of that?
Yeah, there's definitely like a spectrum, right? There were people whose families had been here a long time, like mine, and who didn't speak Armenian, and maybe didn't really know anything except that they were part Armenian, or and then there was others that were like fully Armenian now, speaking Armenian, going to Armenian churches, being involved in Armenian politics and activities, and so it was definitely a wide range of people. It was interesting.
Yeah. Can I ask, have you ever been interested in learning Armenian?
I have, and I've tried different ways, different times. But like learning any language, you have to practice it a lot, and, you know, so no one in my family speaks Armenian. So I've tried an online class one time. I did Holy Trinity Church had in-person classes. But it's, you know, it's challenging. And I did an app one time. I wish Armenian was on Duolingo, but it's not. So, but yeah, what it would be great was to be able to read Armenian, to be able to look at old documents. And I've tried teaching myself. I think I can fully recognize one letter, you know. But yeah, because you have to learn a whole new alphabet. You have to learn what those those characters, what sounds they make, and then when you put the sounds together, it makes an Armenian word, and so then you have to translate that word. So definitely challenging. Maybe when I retire, I'll have more time to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, it does seem very challenging.
Yeah.
And I guess in a similar vein, have you ever visited or would you like to visit Armenia?
I would like to visit. My stronger desire, though, is to visit Turkey, to visit Western Armenia, because that's where my family came from, to see their villages and the landscape that they lived in.
Wow.
I had a friend who was living and working in Turkey for a while, and we tried to go. My husband and I went on our honeymoon, and we flew Turkish Airlines so that we could have a layover in Istanbul. But at that time, something political happened where Turkey was not issuing visas to Americans. And so we weren't able to leave the airport. So, I wanted to do that, and we talk about that, about traveling. So someday I hope to do that.
Yeah, that would be great. And can you tell me what you did after college?
So I graduated from Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, with a degree in landscape architecture. And eventually I got a job with a landscape architect and a landscape contractor in Merced. And so I moved up there, and I lived there for about 20 years. And for most of that time was doing landscape designing, irrigation system designing. When the economic crash happened in 2008, the landscape business got very slow. Merced was a hotbed for construction activity because UC Merced had opened up there, and there was so much housing being built, and we were really, really busy up until the time of the crash. And then we weren't busy at all. And so at that time, I started looking for other work opportunities. I took a detour into retail. I started as a temporary holiday help at Pier 1 Imports, and ended up staying there 7 years, and at one time was the assistant store manager. And all the while, as I'm realizing, okay, this is not the area, this is not my the field I want to be in, right? I want to get back to landscape architecture and working in the environment. And so I was looking for other work opportunities, and I was able to get hired at Caltrans in 2018. So I've been there almost 6 years.
Wow, that's great.
Or 7 years. Yeah, lost track.
And would you mind sharing how you met your husband?
So I never dated a lot, and so I started different. I was just like trying all different things, and so I was trying different online dating. And so one of the dating websites was a Catholic singles, I think, and we met that way. And we didn't like stay online for very long. Like we just sort of met and exchanged a few messages, and then we met in person. And so that's how we met.
That's nice. And do you have any kids?
We don't have children.
Okay. I'm curious if you have been able to get involved in the Armenian churches at all now that you're in Fresno.
I definitely am. Yeah, so we moved to Fresno about 5 years ago. Okay. And like after I commuted from Merced for 2 years to Caltrans before we moved. We moved in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. That was a whole story in itself. Wow. It was a crazy time. When you couldn't like be in the same room as anybody, so like everything became online. All the paperwork and was sent electronically, and anyways, that was interesting. But so now that I'm here in Fresno, I've really been taking advantage of just all the activities. Like all the churches have their different festivals and lunches and dinners, and so we attend church at the Shrine of St. Therese Catholic Church, but I definitely attend activities and programs at the Armenian churches. And since I didn't I don't have I'm not partial to any one church, so I'll go to any of the events at any Armenian church.
Wow. And can you share more about your work at the Armenian Conservancy? Sure.
So even before I moved to Fresno, I was writing my blog, which I'm not very actively writing now. I keep meaning to get back to it, and I end up doing like one post a year. It's just hard. I have too many hobbies. Von Paloutzian contacted me after reading the blog and said, "Hey, would you like to come do a presentation for their family history nights?"
Oh.
And so I came down and did a presentation at the Woodward Park Library. And so and then everyone was very excited to meet me and stuff, and I just realized that their organization was something that I wanted to be involved in, and I think I'm kind of like the youngest person involved, so I was happy to like help, with whatever I could help with my expertise.
Mm. And so most of your blog was about your own family history?
Yeah, it was just I called it a genealogy blog, and so I would it was a way to share, because I do it, and I'm doing it, I'm sitting at my computer and I'm finding stuff out, and so sometimes I'll call or message my parents, "Hey, look what I found, this is what I found," or but it was it's hard to share it unless someone's sitting down next to you and you're showing them all the images and documents, and unless you're gonna write out a story, it's really hard to share with the other family. I mean, both of my parents have pretty big families, lots of cousins, and I wanted to share that with them, and so that's why I started writing the blog, just so I could share it with other people. And then it's also kind of like a trap, because people Google their name, right, and then they find you, and so I've had a lot of people find me, cousins, people in my family that have found me, and or we've been able to exchange. I've gotten more pictures of family members that I didn't have, or so like I said, my great grandfather Manu, his brothers came, and so I've been able to, and Agda Barton, I've been able to contact different members in those families, and we even had a big Paloutzian reunion that I put together. We did 2. We kind of did them.
Wow.
I think it was 2014 and 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And got a lot of these people together that had never met each other.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Can you share who was able to attend those? Who you got together?
So the first one was so my grandfather was the oldest of 5 brothers. And so the first one, it was just that family. So the 5 brothers and all of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I can show you some pictures later. So it was 100 plus people, I'm sure. I didn't count. And then people had a good time, and a lot of people were "Oh, let's do this again." So 2 years later, I'm "Okay, let's do this again." And some people were excited and some people weren't as excited. But this time I expanded it to basically all the descendants of the people in this picture. So, whereas at first it was just these people's descendants, then I tried to get all of these people's descendants. So, various different members of the families came, and a lot of them live around here, and that's what's crazy, is that we're all here and close to each other and know people in common, and, but don't realize, that you're cousins, because they're second cousins and third cousins, and so that was fun. And I've had people say, and then then it was 4 years later was the pandemic, and so then, and now I'm here, and people have said, "Oh, we should do that again," and so I'll probably try to organize something at some point.
Wow, that would be great.
Yeah.
Do you have any other long-term plans for genealogy or for the Armenian Conservancy?
Well, so the Armenian Conservancy right now is starting to try and raise money to move the Vartanian house, which is a historic house in Fresno that needs to be moved. The location is the Fresno Mission had the property where the Vartanian house was, and they restored the house and they used it as an office But now they're ready to expand. They want to build a new building, and so they're willing to give us the building. And there's a house, like an old Victorian house. There's a barn, and there's a old pump house. But we need to move them, and so as you can imagine, moving an old building requires a lot of planning and infrastructure. We need a place to move it to. Like the whole building will have to be like cut in half, and then you have to, like, when you're moving a building down the street, you have to deal with power poles and all this stuff. And so then a building location, we've been working with the city. There's a lot of excess properties that are the responsibility of the successor agency to redevelopment, and they're willing to sell us or give us the property for a low cost, but they want to know that we have the funds to say what we want to do. So really, we need to raise like $1 million, to see this happen. So I really hope that we can get it together to get the word out, get more people involved, get people behind this. It's kind of hard because people who are associated with a certain church tend to stay with that church. And it's hard. There isn't really like an overarching Armenian organization that encompasses everybody. Mm-hmm. And this is what the Armenian Cultural Conservancy could be. Because there isn't. So there's an Armenian Museum of Fresno, which is basically an art museum. But it doesn't have a lot of like local history. There's a nice display at the Fresno Fair in their historical museum that actually the guys who put it together, the Aronian brothers, are actually in my family. There isn't a overarching organization that ties all the Armenians together. And because we're third and fourth, maybe even fifth generation of the ones that came early and founded the Armenian community in Fresno, it's kind of like we're diluted, for lack of a better term. It's like we may or may not be tied to Armenian churches anymore. We probably don't speak Armenian anymore. So on my dad has 7 cousins on his mother's side, and I don't remember off the top of my head, maybe 10 or 12 cousins on his father's side. Only one married another Armenian. So I mean, and that's what happens, that's America, right? So, but it just means that there's, I don't know, less to tie you to that culture, right? Your loyalties are divided, or there's, you might not go to Armenian church. Like we didn't go to Armenian church; we went to Catholic church. So, so I think that's where the Armenian community in Fresno is. Of course, there's there's newer people that are coming, and but now they're coming from, they came from Soviet Armenia, or now they're coming from the Republic of Armenia. Mm-hmm. And so, but their culture is different. It's not the culture of the Western Armenians that came, a lot of them who spoke Turkish or wrote Turkish with Armenian letters, and a lot of the words that we use for food are Turkish words. So it's a different culture, and Western Armenian is a different dialect from Eastern Armenian. So, so trying to rally people to want to preserve that Western culture, that history, that's what I hope I can help do. Mm-hmm. There's another picture, a big family picture of my grandmother's family, the Basnagians and the Kashishians, who came from Bitlis and Diyarbakir. And it was kind of the same thing. It's a big family picture.
I'm curious what motivates you to learn more about your ancestors and their history.
I guess I'm just a naturally curious person, and I want to be a lifelong learner. I don't know. It's just an interest of mine, history, and wanting to have connection to something.
And can you tell me what preserving your Armenian identity means to you?
I hate the idea of something being lost, and just for things to fade into the past without any recognition or or saving that. I think the idea that something gets lost in time, that people won't remember, I think that's what is important to me. And then plus, when you're investigating it now, being involved in it now, it's another way to connect with people.
Yeah. And can you tell me what being Armenian means to you?
I've always felt like that, everybody's culture is unique and different, but somehow being Armenian always felt special because it's not a huge population of people, and it seems like whenever you recognize another Armenian, you meet someone who's Armenian, like at school, like you'd find out someone, oh, I'm half Armenian too. I don't know if that's the same with people who are German or French or Chinese or anything. I don't know if it's the same, but being Armenian, somehow it feels special. We have that place in early history in the Middle East, in that part of the world, the early history with the church. So it feels like our culture is important, and we've always been a culture, a community, not very often in power, usually subjugated to other cultures. And so, I don't know, it just, I've always been proud to be Armenian, and I've always wanted to share that with people and to find other Armenians to connect with.